The city was quiet now, but that silence was a lie, the calm before the storm. Once, these streets bustled with life, filled with the sounds of children laughing, cars honking, and everyday chatter. Now, they were dead zones. Buildings lay in ruins, windows shattered, and the air was thick with an eerie stillness that pressed down on every survivor's chest. Jackson stood on the rooftop of a crumbling apartment building, surveying the empty streets below with sharp, wary eyes. The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in blood-red and orange hues, a reminder of the world's brokenness. He wasn't just a survivor, he was a fighter. For the past 6 months, he and a small band of survivors had been locked in a brutal war against the relentless undead, creatures once human, now driven only by hunger. Jackson's grip tightened around the worn handle of his crossbow. Every shadow could hide danger, every corner could be the last. But for now, the streets were silent, almost too silent. "Something's coming," whispered Mia, his closest companion, emerging from the stairwell behind him. Her voice was steady, but Jackson could see the tension in her eyes. She scanned the horizon, her own weapon, a sharpened machete, ready at her side. "They always come," Jackson replied grimly. "The dead don't rest, and neither do we." Their camp had been a makeshift fortress inside an old library, surrounded by barricades and traps. They had managed to hold the undead at bay, but resources were running thin. Food was scarce, and morale was fragile. Every day was a fight not just for survival, but for hope. Suddenly, a distant noise shattered the silence, the guttural moans of the undead. A faint rustling from the alley below grew louder, and Jackson signaled for the others to prepare. From behind a broken wall, the first zombie appeared, slow, shambling, with empty eyes and outstretched arms. Then another, and another. Within moments, the streets were flooded with the dead, their groans filling the air like a haunting symphony. Jackson raised his crossbow and fired. The bolt flew true, striking a zombie's skull with a sickening thud. Mia leapt down from the rooftop, her machete flashing as she cut through the approaching horde. The survivors rallied behind them, weapons raised and ready. But these were no ordinary zombies. Something was different. They moved faster, with more coordination, as if the dead were learning, evolving. "Fall back!" Jackson shouted, signaling his team to retreat toward the library. "They're changing. We need to regroup." The survivors fought with everything they had, but the undead pressed harder. The air was thick with dust and fear as they retreated, barricading the doors behind them. Safe, for now. Inside, Jackson's group caught their breath. The library was dark except for a flickering candle that cast long shadows on the walls. Maps, notes, and scavenged supplies lay scattered across tables. Mia approached a makeshift radio, her fingers trembling slightly as she adjusted the frequency. "Any response?" she asked. Static crackled, then a faint voice. "This is Base Echo. Do you copy? Are you safe?" Jackson's heart jumped. Other survivors. Other fighters. "We're alive," he replied quickly. "But the dead are getting stronger. We need help, weapons, reinforcements." The voice on the radio was tense but hopeful. "Hold your position. Rescue teams are en route. Stay strong." As the radio went silent, Jackson looked around at the tired faces of his companions. The war had only just begun, but the survivors were ready. They would fight for every street, every building, every breath. The streets of dead America echoed with the sounds of war, but the survivors were no longer hiding. They were striking back, and they would not stop until the city was theirs again. Part 2, the battle lines are drawn. The faint glow of the candle flickered against the peeling walls of the library, casting long, restless shadows over the group of survivors. Outside, the distant groans of the undead reverberated through the broken streets, a chilling reminder that the battle was far from over. Jackson paced back and forth, running a hand through his unkempt hair. His mind was racing. The undead were evolving, growing more dangerous with each passing day. They weren't just mindless monsters anymore, they were a force adapting to the fight. If the survivors didn't act quickly, their sanctuary wouldn't last long. Mia was hunched over the radio, attempting to establish another connection. Base Echo said reinforcements are coming, but no clear timeline, she reported quietly. We can't wait forever. Jackson nodded grimly. We need to find out what's driving the change in the zombies. If we can understand them, maybe we can find a way to stop them. That was when Sarah, the group's medic, spoke up from her corner. There's something else, she said cautiously. I've noticed patterns in the attacks, more aggressive, more organized. And I found strange markings on the dead last week, symbols, almost like a code. Jackson frowned. Symbols? What kind of code? Sarah pulled a crumpled notebook from her bag. I don't know yet, but it feels like someone or something is controlling them. Maybe a signal, a hive mind. It's why they're coordinating now, hunting us. The room fell silent. That idea was terrifying. If the undead were being controlled, then this was no longer a random apocalypse. It was a calculated siege. We need to find the source, Jackson said, determination sharpening his voice. Whatever's controlling them, we end it, or we die trying. Mia grabbed her machete and stood. We should scout the old city hall. It's been abandoned for months, but if there's any control center, it would be there. Jackson agreed. We'll take a small team. Stealth first, no unnecessary fights. The survivors began to prepare. Weapons were checked and rechecked, ammunition was rationed carefully. Jackson's team consisted of 5, himself, Mia, Sarah, Marcus, a quiet but skilled hunter, and Eli, the youngest of the group but surprisingly resourceful. As they slipped out into the twilight, the streets felt like a different world. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and the city was bathed in an ominous blue-gray light. The scent of decay lingered in the air, mixed with the faint metallic tang of rusted metal. The group moved cautiously, using shadows and ruined buildings for cover. Every sound was amplified, the distant drip of water, the soft scuffle of feet, the low groan of a lone zombie far off in the distance. Jackson's heart pounded in rhythm with his quick steps. At one point, Marcus froze, raising a finger to signal silence. Up ahead, 2 zombies shuffled close together, their movements strangely synchronized, almost like a pair hunting in tandem. Jackson's eyes narrowed. The rumors were true, these creatures were evolving. Faster, smarter, more dangerous. They slipped past, barely making a sound. When they reached the city hall, the building loomed tall and foreboding. Its windows were shattered, and vines crept up the cracked walls like skeletal fingers reaching for the sky. The front doors hung ajar, creaking softly in the cold breeze. Jackson motioned for the group to spread out. Stay sharp. This place could be a trap. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the stale odor of long-forgotten offices. Broken furniture lay scattered across the floor, and torn papers fluttered like ghosts in the faint wind. Sarah shone her flashlight across the room, revealing faded graffiti on the walls. Strange symbols, just like the ones she had seen before. We're on the right track, she whispered. Suddenly, a low, guttural noise echoed from the basement stairs. Sounds like they're coming, Eli whispered, clutching his small handgun tighter. Jackson signaled to move forward, carefully, silently. The group descended the stairs, weapons ready. The deeper they went, the stronger the sounds grew, groans, shuffles, and something else, whispers. Faint, almost human, but distorted. In the basement, they found a room filled with old computers and broken monitors, tangled wires running like veins across the floor. Looks like some kind of control center, Marcus said, awe and fear mixing in his voice. Jackson knelt by a flickering screen. Despite the damage, faint signals blinked across the monitor, a strange pulse sending commands to the undead above ground. Before anyone could react, the basement door slammed shut with a deafening bang. Trap! Jackson shouted, firing at the door. The noise attracted attention from above. The first wave of zombies poured down the stairs, faster and more aggressive than before. The group fought desperately, blades and bullets slicing through the air as they held their ground. Jackson's crossbow snapped, hitting its target dead on. Mia's machete flashed as she cut down another. Sarah tended to a deep cut on Eli's arm while fending off a zombie with her other hand. But there were too many. As the survivors fought, Jackson caught a glimpse of something chilling, a figure, half shadow, half human, controlling the undead with a strange device strapped to their arm. The battle had just taken a terrifying turn. "We need to take that thing down," Jackson growled, rallying the group. "If we can stop the controller, we stop the horde." The survivors regrouped, breathing hard, ready for the fight of their lives. The streets of Dead America might be filled with the sounds of war, but this time, the survivors had a clear target and a chance to strike back. Would you like me to proceed with Part 3 now? Part 3, Shadows of Control. The room was thick with dust and the stench of decay, yet the survivors' breaths came in sharp, desperate gasps. The horde was closing in fast, and the presence of that shadowy figure controlling the undead sent chills down Jackson's spine. Mia planted herself firmly, swinging her machete with deadly precision, slicing through the nearest zombies. "Jackson, that controller, we have to get to it," she shouted, voice fierce despite the chaos. Jackson nodded, clutching his broken crossbow but quickly switching to his sidearm, a weathered pistol with just a handful of bullets left. "Cover me," he commanded, eyes locking onto the dark silhouette manipulating the undead like a puppeteer. The figure moved with unnatural fluidity, stepping back just out of reach, the strange device on their arm pulsing faintly with a cold blue glow. Jackson's heart pounded. This was no ordinary enemy. Eli stumbled past him, a fresh gash on his forehead. "We can't hold them much longer," he yelled. Sarah, doing her best to staunch Eli's bleeding wound, glanced nervously at the controller. "If we don't stop that signal, the entire city's doomed." Marcus gritted his teeth. "Then we stop it here and now." The survivors tightened their formation, pushing back the encroaching undead while Jackson advanced toward the controller. Each step was heavy with fear and determination. Suddenly, the controller turned, revealing a face half hidden beneath a ragged hood, sharp eyes gleaming with cold intelligence. A voice, distorted and mechanical, echoed through the room. "You cannot win. The dead are the future." Jackson's blood ran cold. "Who are you?" he demanded. "Why are you doing this?" The figure smiled cruelly. "To rebuild this broken world. The living are weak, the dead will inherit." Jackson's mind raced. This wasn't just an enemy, it was a fanatic, someone who believed the undead apocalypse was salvation. Mia lunged, but the controller raised a device emitting a pulse wave. The undead around the survivors surged forward with renewed ferocity, pushing them back. "Fall back," Jackson ordered, dragging Mia away as zombies closed in. Bullets and blades kept the creatures at bay, but the survivors were overwhelmed. Retreating to a narrow hallway, Jackson barked orders. "We need a plan, that device is controlling them all." Sarah, clutching her medical kit, frowned. "If we can disable the power source, maybe the undead will lose control." Marcus scanned the room for anything useful. "There." A control panel beside that console. "If we can short-circuit it." Jackson didn't wait. "I'm going for it." "Cover me." He sprinted toward the panel, dodging grasping hands and snapping jaws. His pistol roared, cutting down undead who got too close. Reaching the console, Jackson yanked open the panel. Inside were tangled wires and blinking lights, the heart of the controller's machine. With a sharp breath, he grabbed a heavy metal rod from the floor and slammed it into the wiring. Sparks flew, lights flickered, and a low hum escalated into a violent roar. Suddenly, the pulsing glow on the controller's arm dimmed, and the undead around the survivors slowed, their movements becoming erratic and uncoordinated. The controller screamed in frustration, trying to recalibrate the device, but Jackson's sabotage was too effective. Mia pressed forward, tackling the controller to the ground. A fierce struggle ensued as the survivors joined in, weapons aimed at the fallen enemy. Finally, Jackson kicked the device free, smashing it beneath his boot. The undead collapsed, their minds no longer driven by the sinister signal. They became the shambling, aimless creatures the survivors knew too well. Panting, the group surrounded the subdued controller, who glared at them with hatred. "Why?" Mia demanded. "Why bring this destruction on the world?" The figure sneered. "To cleanse it. To remake it in a new image." Sarah stepped forward, her voice cold. "You're wrong. The living will rebuild, and will fight to protect what remains." Jackson surveyed the team, their eyes burning with resolve. This victory was small, but it was a turning point. "We need to find out more about this device," Jackson said, looking at the broken pieces underfoot. "There may be others like it." The survivors gathered what they could from the control room: data drives, tools, anything that might hold clues. As they prepared to leave the city hall, Jackson looked back at the dark streets. The war wasn't over. The undead were still out there, dangerous and relentless. But now, the survivors had hope that they could strike back with purpose. "We head back to the library," Jackson said. "We regroup, we plan, and then we take the fight to them." Mia nodded. "We're ready." The survivors slipped out into the night, moving swiftly through the shadows. Outside, the city was alive with quiet danger, but also with determination. The streets of dead America would continue to echo with the sounds of war. But the survivors were ready to fight, and this time, they had a weapon no zombie could match: hope. "If you want, I can continue with part 4 now. Just say the word." "You." Part 4, The Cost of Survival. The survivors returned to the library, their temporary haven in this shattered city. Though victorious in the basement fight, the victory weighed heavily on their minds. The controller's chilling words echoed in Jackson's head: "The dead are the future." Inside the dimly lit library, the group gathered around a worn table, strewn with maps, weapons, and the salvaged pieces of the controller's device. Mia carefully examined the broken parts, her fingers tracing the cold, unfamiliar metals. "This tech, it's beyond anything we've seen," she muttered. "It's not just controlling zombies, it's hacking into their neural pathways. Whoever built this was a genius, or a madman." Sarah added quietly, "If this falls into the wrong hands, it could mean the end for all of us." Jackson's eyes hardened. "We have to figure out where it came from. If we find the source, we can stop more controllers from rising." Marcus pulled out a crude map, marked with places the group had scouted over the past weeks. "There's a research facility about 10 miles from here. It was abandoned during the early days of the outbreak. Some say it was involved in military experiments." "That's our next stop," Jackson decided. "It's risky, but if the tech was developed there, we might find answers, or weapons." The survivors prepared once again, gathering supplies and sharpening their weapons. Eli, his youthful face marked with exhaustion and determination, approached Jackson. "Are you sure about this? That place is dangerous, even more than City Hall." Jackson placed a reassuring hand on Eli's shoulder. "We don't have a choice. We fight, or we disappear." The night outside was thick with an eerie stillness, but beneath the silence, tension thrummed like a pulse. Every shadow seemed to hide a lurking threat. The group moved out, their steps quick but cautious. As they neared the research facility, the air changed, colder, heavier, with an unnatural stillness that set nerves on edge. The building itself was a hulking silhouette against the moonlit sky, windows shattered, walls cracked and weathered by years of neglect. The entrance was barricaded with rusted metal sheets, but with combined effort, the survivors pried them open. Inside, the facility was a labyrinth of cold corridors, abandoned labs, and flickering fluorescent lights that cast ghostly glows on the walls. Jackson led the way, flashlight cutting through the darkness. "Stay close. Watch every corner." They came upon a lab filled with broken equipment, chemical vials shattered on the floor, and walls lined with peeling warnings. Among the debris, a sealed room remained intact, the door marked with faded warnings: "Biohazard, authorized personnel only." Sarah's breath caught. This is it. This could be where they created the device. The group forced the door open. Inside, the lab was eerily preserved, as if the scientists had fled in a hurry. Computer terminals flickered weakly, and files were scattered across desks. Mia immediately got to work, connecting a portable power supply to one of the terminals. The screen blinked to life, revealing encrypted files and schematics. Jackson peered over her shoulder. "What is it?" Mia's eyes widened. "It's a neural interface, designed to control biological organisms remotely. Originally for medical use, to help paralyzed patients, but someone reprogrammed it for controlling the undead." Marcus frowned. "Who would do that?" The answer came suddenly. A hidden folder popped open, revealing a video file. Hesitant, Jackson pressed play. The grainy footage showed a suited man speaking in a cold, emotionless tone. "Project Phoenix is our last hope to restore order. The world as we know it is ending. Through the control of infected subjects, we can rebuild a new society." The video cut abruptly. Jackson's jaw clenched. They weaponized the undead. They made monsters into tools. Eli swallowed hard. And now those tools are hunting us. Suddenly, a distant explosion rocked the building, shaking the floor beneath them. Alarms blared to life, a shrill wail piercing the air. "Trouble," Mia said sharply. "They know we're here." Jackson grabbed his pistol. "We have what we came for. Time to go." As they moved toward the exit, the halls filled with the sound of heavy footsteps, the unmistakable shuffle of zombies. But these weren't ordinary undead, they moved with unnatural speed and precision. Outnumbered and cornered, the survivors fought fiercely. Every swing, every shot was a desperate plea to live another day. Sarah tended to Marcus's wounded arm as they fled down a crumbling staircase. "We need a way out, now." Jackson looked ahead, a loading dock with a battered van, keys dangling from the ignition. "Go! I'll cover you." The group scrambled into the van as Jackson held the line, taking down zombies with brutal efficiency. The van's engine roared to life, and Mia slammed the door shut just as Jackson leapt inside. They sped away, the facility shrinking behind them in a cloud of smoke and flame. As they drove through the ruined streets, Jackson stared out at the city, once full of life, now a battleground between the living and the dead. "We have the technology," Jackson said grimly. "But it's a double-edged sword. Whoever controls it could tip the scales, for better or worse." Mia nodded. "We need to be ready." Jackson's gaze hardened with resolve. This war isn't just survival anymore. It's about who controls the future of dead America. The survivors were battered, but not broken. They had new knowledge, new hope, and a mission that would push them to the limits of their strength and courage. Because in this world, where every shadow held a threat and every step could be the last, the fight for survival had only just begun. Would you like to proceed with Part 5? Part 5, Allies in the Darkness. The van rumbled over cracked pavement as the survivors put distance between themselves and the burning research facility. Tension hung heavy in the air, thick as the smoke trailing behind them. Jackson's eyes scanned the dark streets through the cracked windshield, alert to every sound, every shadow. "We can't keep running," Mia said, breaking the silence. "We need allies." Jackson nodded slowly. "There are still pockets of survivors out there. We just have to find them, and fast." Sarah tightened her grip on the medical bag resting on her lap. "Trust is hard to come by now. After everything that's happened." Eli, sitting beside her, glanced out the window nervously. "What if they're worse than the zombies? Or just as dangerous?" Jackson took a deep breath. "Then we deal with that when the time comes." The van slowed as they approached the outskirts of the city. Tall buildings gave way to crumbling suburbs, where nature was already reclaiming the land. Overgrown vines snaked through broken windows, and rusted cars sat abandoned like relics from a forgotten era. Suddenly, a shout rang out from a nearby alley. The survivors tensed, weapons raised. "Hold on," Marcus said, signaling them to stop. A figure stumbled into the street, a young woman, her clothes torn, face smeared with dirt and sweat. She collapsed near the van's door, gasping for breath. Jackson jumped out, helping her inside. "Who are you? What happened?" She looked around, eyes wild. Name's Lila. I was part of a group. They're gone now, taken by the undead, or worse. Mia frowned. Worse? Lila nodded, tears welling. Some survivors turned on us. Fought over supplies, and they didn't care who got hurt. Jackson's jaw tightened. We're not like that. We fight together. Lila managed a shaky smile. Good, because there's more coming. She told them about a faction called the Revenants, ruthless survivors who used brutal tactics to control territory. They had captured several safe zones, forcing others into submission. Sarah shivered. They're as dangerous as the undead. The survivors exchanged grim looks. They needed allies, but the cost of trust was higher than ever. We have to find the others before the Revenants do, Jackson said. If we don't, the city will fall completely. The van's engine sputtered to life again, and they drove deeper into the suburbs. The streets grew quieter, shadows lengthening as the sun dipped below the horizon. Suddenly, headlights flashed from a side street. The van jerked to a halt as a battered pickup truck pulled up beside them. A man leaned out the window, his face partially obscured by a scarf. You Jackson? Jackson nodded cautiously. Who wants to know? The man grinned. Name's Cole. I run a small group not far from here. Heard you were fighting the same fight. Mia exchanged a glance with Jackson. Can we trust him? Jackson didn't answer immediately. Instead, he watched as Cole's eyes scanned the group, assessing their gear, their weapons. We don't have time for strangers, Jackson finally said. But if you're serious about helping, then lead the way. Cole nodded. Follow me. But watch your backs, the Revenants don't like visitors. The van rolled forward, headlights cutting through the twilight. As they followed the pickup, the survivors felt a flicker of hope, but also the weight of uncertainty. The road twisted and turned, leading them through neighborhoods scarred by battle and neglect. Occasionally, figures darted between buildings, disappearing before they could be identified. Finally, Cole pulled into a fenced compound, hidden behind thick walls topped with barbed wire. Welcome to Haven, he said with a bitter smile. Inside, the survivors found a small but well-organized community. Makeshift homes and barricades surrounded a central courtyard where children played under watchful eyes. Jackson stepped out, greeted by wary but curious faces. We're not just fighting the undead anymore, Jackson said, addressing the gathered group. There's a new enemy, one that wants to control the city by fear. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. We need to stand together, Jackson continued. To protect what little we have left. Cole clapped him on the back. You've got yourself a deal. But even as they spoke, dark eyes watched from the shadows beyond the walls. The Revenants had noticed the newcomers. Back outside the compound, a figure in black armor communicated silently through a radio. They've arrived at Haven. Prepare the assault. Jackson's group didn't know it yet, but the real battle for the city was about to begin. As night fell over dead America, the streets waited, silent but deadly, ready to echo once again with the sounds of war. Would you like me to continue with Part 6 now? Part 6, The Siege of Haven. Night cloaked Haven in thick shadows, broken only by the flicker of campfires and the dim glow of makeshift lanterns. Inside the fortified compound, the survivors worked quickly to reinforce barricades and prepare defenses. Jackson's voice cut through the hum of activity as he organized the group. We don't know how many Revenants are coming, he warned, but they'll come hard and fast. Stay alert. Mia checked her weapons methodically. I've got the perimeter covered with tripwires and noise traps. Hopefully, they'll slow the attackers down. Sarah handed out extra medical supplies. We need to be ready for casualties. Eli stood by the gate, nervously clutching his rifle. I've never been in a fight like this before. Jackson nodded to him, his expression firm but understanding. You're ready. Trust yourself. Outside the walls, the Revenants gathered in silence, their black armor blending with the night. Their leader, a ruthless figure known only as Cade, studied a holographic map projected from his wrist device. Haven stands between us and total control of this city, Cade said coldly. We crush them tonight. Leave no survivors. With a signal, the revenants moved forward, a coordinated wave of deadly precision. They weren't just zombies to fear, these were trained fighters with weapons, tactics, and a terrifying will to dominate. As the first revenants reached the outer barricades, traps exploded in a shower of sparks and debris. The survivors fought fiercely, but the attackers pressed on relentlessly. Jackson led a group to the western gate, where heavy gunfire echoed through the night. Bullets tore through wood and metal, and screams of pain and fury mixed with the sharp cracks of gunfire. Hold the line! Jackson shouted, firing at the advancing enemy. Mia crouched behind a stack of crates, picking off revenants with precision. They just keep coming. Inside Haven, chaos erupted. Alarms blared, and people scrambled to assist the wounded. Sarah moved swiftly from one injured survivor to another, her hands steady despite the terror around her. A sudden explosion rocked the eastern wall, sending dust and rubble into the air. Eli was thrown off balance, landing hard on the ground. He scrambled up, clutching a bleeding arm. Jackson ran to his side. You okay? Yeah, just a scratch, Eli gritted out, but pain flickered in his eyes. The battle raged on, a brutal clash of wills and survival. Each side fought with desperation, the revenants to claim control, the survivors to protect their last refuge. Amidst the chaos, Jackson spotted Cade moving toward the center of the compound, rallying his troops with cold efficiency. If Cade reached the heart of Haven, the survivors would be doomed. Follow me! Jackson yelled, rallying a small team to intercept. They moved through the smoke and fire, weaving past fallen fighters and overturned debris. The tension in the air was suffocating, every step could be their last. At the courtyard, Jackson faced Cade. The two leaders locked eyes, a silent battle of wills. Cade smirked. You think this changes anything? The city is ours. Jackson raised his weapon. Not while I'm standing. Their fight was fierce and unforgiving. Cade was strong, but Jackson fought with the desperation of a man protecting everything he loved. Suddenly, Mia appeared with a makeshift flamethrower, forcing Cade to retreat. Get back, she shouted. Cade snarled but pulled his men back, disappearing into the smoke. The survivors breathed a momentary sigh of relief, but Jackson knew this was only the beginning. The revenants would regroup. They would return. And the war for dead America was far from over. As dawn broke, the battered survivors tended to their wounds and counted their losses. But their spirit was unbroken. We survived tonight, Jackson said quietly. And tomorrow, we fight again. Ready for Part 7? Part 7, Shadows of Betrayal. The morning sun struggled to pierce the thick clouds hanging over Haven. The survivors moved like ghosts through the debris-strewn compound, exhaustion etched deeply on their faces. The siege had left scars, both visible and hidden, but the fight had forged them into something stronger, more determined. Jackson surveyed the battered group, every loss a heavy weight on his heart. They had held the line, but barely. Supplies were low, and trust, always fragile in a world turned upside down, was now dangerously fragile. Mia was repairing broken barricades, her jaw clenched in concentration. They'll be back, she said, her voice grim. Stronger, smarter. Sarah moved among the wounded, her hands steady but her eyes revealing a quiet worry. We need more than defense, she said. We need to find out who else is out there. More allies or enemies, we can't afford surprises. Jackson nodded. Cole and his group might know more. But we need to be careful, this city is full of shadows. Not everyone wants to help. As they prepared to scout for supplies and intelligence, a new unease settled over Haven. Whispers drifted through the camp, eyes darted suspiciously, and tension crackled like static electricity. Eli approached Jackson quietly. There's talk. Some think someone here might be working with the revenants. Jackson's eyes narrowed. Betrayal is the deadliest kind of wound. The survivors gathered for a tense meeting. Jackson addressed the group, his voice firm but measured. We face enemies without, and maybe within. We need to watch each other, but also remember why we're here. To survive. Together. Suddenly, a loud crash interrupted the meeting. A young man stumbled into the courtyard, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. They're coming back, he gasped. And they've got something new. Mia grabbed her rifle. What do you mean? The man struggled to speak. The revenants, they've found a way to use the undead differently. They're controlling them. A chilling silence fell over Haven. Jackson's mind raced. Controlled undead? That changes everything. Cole stepped forward, voice low but urgent. If they're using the undead as weapons, we're in real trouble. That night, under the cover of darkness, Jackson, Mia, and a small team set out to investigate. The streets outside Haven were eerily silent, the usual groans and shuffles replaced by a tense stillness. They moved cautiously, every shadow a potential threat. As they approached a ruined warehouse, faint lights flickered inside. Peering through a cracked window, they saw it, a horrifying sight. Revenants stood among rows of undead, seemingly directing them with strange devices emitting pulses of light. Mia swallowed hard. They're using technology to control them. Jackson clenched his fists. This isn't just a fight for survival anymore. It's a war for the future of humanity. Suddenly, footsteps echoed behind them. They spun around, and came face to face with a familiar figure. Jackson, the stranger said, voice dripping with bitterness. Did you really think you could trust everyone? It was one of their own, someone they had welcomed into Haven. The betrayal hit like a knife. I had no choice, the traitor said. The revenants promised safety. Power. Jackson's heart pounded. You sold us out? The traitor nodded, eyes cold. This world is changing. You can't stop it. A tense standoff ensued. Jackson's team was outnumbered but not outmatched. They quickly subdued the traitor and tied him up. Back at Haven, the survivors grappled with the bitter truth. Trust was a fragile thing, and betrayal could come from the most unexpected places. Jackson stood before the group. We will not let this break us. We fight not just for survival, but for the future we believe in. No matter what shadows lie ahead. The night stretched on, filled with whispered plans and quiet resolve. The fight for dead America had become more than a battle for streets and supplies, it was a battle for the soul of what was left. And the survivors were ready to face it, together. Would you like me to continue with Part 8? Part 8, The Turning Tide. Days passed in a tense blur within the walls of Haven. The survivors moved cautiously, aware that the betrayal had shaken their foundation but refusing to let it break their resolve. Every face carried the weight of exhaustion and fear, but in their eyes burned the fierce determination to reclaim their city. Jackson gathered the team for a crucial meeting. We know the revenants are using controlled undead against us, he said, voice low but commanding. We need a plan, one that hits them where it hurts. Mia spoke up, eyes sharp with strategy. Their control devices are clustered in the warehouse we spotted. If we can destroy them, the undead will go rogue, giving us a chance to turn the tide. Eli, still recovering from his injuries, frowned. Getting in won't be easy. They'll be ready for us. Jackson nodded. That's why this is a team effort. We hit fast and hard. No room for mistakes. Over the next 2 days, the survivors prepared for what could be their most dangerous mission yet. Supplies were gathered, weapons checked, and every detail planned with precision. Trust had been tested, but now it had to be unwavering. When night fell, Jackson led a small, elite group through the maze of ruined streets toward the warehouse. The air was thick with tension, every sound amplified in the silence. They moved like shadows, careful not to alert the revenants inside. Peering through the cracked door, they saw the eerie glow of the control devices, pulsating machines that emitted a soft hum, commanding the undead like puppets. Mia pulled out a small device, a homemade EMP emitter. This should knock out their controls temporarily, she whispered. Jackson nodded. Let's move. The team slipped inside, weapons ready. The faint sound of footsteps alerted the revenants, who quickly rallied to defend their stronghold. A fierce battle erupted within the warehouse. Shots rang out, and the sharp scent of smoke filled the air. The survivors fought with everything they had, each second feeling like a lifetime. Mia activated the EMP device. A pulse of energy surged through the room. The machines flickered and died, and suddenly, the controlled undead went berserk, turning on their revenant masters. Chaos exploded as both sides were thrown into confusion. Jackson saw his chance. Push forward. Take control. They fought through the madness, destroying what machines they could find. The tide of battle shifted as the undead, no longer controlled, became a threat to everyone. Cade, the revenant leader, snarled in frustration. Regroup. Regroup. But it was too late. The warehouse was lost. As the survivors escaped, Jackson glanced back to see the chaos consume the building. The control over the undead was broken, but the danger was far from over. Back at Haven, the news of the victory sparked a surge of hope. The survivors cheered, though exhaustion was heavy in their bones. Sarah looked over the crowd. This is just the beginning. We've disrupted their plans, but the revenants will come back stronger. Jackson met her gaze, steady and unwavering. Then we'll be ready. The days that followed were filled with preparation and planning for the next inevitable attack. Supplies were rationed carefully, and the community's defenses were strengthened. Yet even in the calm, an undercurrent of tension remained. The betrayal still haunted them, a reminder that danger could come not just from outside, but from within. One evening, as Jackson stood watch on the ramparts, Mia joined him. You think we can really win this? Jackson looked out over the broken cityscape, the remnants of a once vibrant world now scarred by war. We have to, he said quietly. Because if we don't, no one will. Suddenly, a flicker of movement caught Mia's eye, a figure darting between buildings in the distance. Enemies, she whispered, raising her rifle. Jackson's heart tightened. The war for dead America was far from over. But the survivors had tasted victory, and with it, a renewed fire to fight on. Together, they would face the darkness, no matter what shadows the night held. Would you like to continue with Part 9 now? Part 9, the final gambit. The quiet after the warehouse battle was deceiving. Haven seemed almost peaceful, but Jackson knew better. The revenants would not stay silent for long. They were dangerous, relentless, and now more desperate than ever. The survivors rebuilt what they could, tending to wounds and reinforcing defenses. But the true test was still ahead. The revenants' technology was down, but Cade's fury was rising. Jackson sat with Mia and Sarah in the dimly lit command tent, poring over maps and reports. They're gathering strength, Jackson said, voice low. We need to anticipate their next move. Mia nodded. I intercepted some radio chatter. They're planning a final assault, bigger than anything before. Sarah's face hardened. They want to wipe us out completely. Jackson's jaw tightened. Then we need a plan that doesn't just defend, it ends this. The survivors called it the final gambit, a risky plan to take the fight directly to the revenants, to break their will once and for all. At dawn, a select team assembled, ready to infiltrate the revenants' stronghold deep in the heart of the city. Supplies were limited, weapons loaded, and nerves stretched thin. Jackson addressed the group, eyes burning with resolve. This mission isn't just about survival. It's about reclaiming our future. We strike hard, we strike fast, and we do not give up. They moved through abandoned streets, every shadow a potential threat. The city was eerily silent, save for the distant groans of the undead and the occasional crackle of radio static. Reaching the outskirts of the revenant's base, the team paused. Mia took point, scouting ahead with a flashlight. They're ready for us, she whispered. Heavily armed. Jackson took a deep breath. Then we fight smarter. The assault began under a cover of darkness. Explosions shattered the silence as the survivors breached the compound's walls. Revenants poured out, weapons blazing, but the survivors were relentless. Fierce firefights erupted through the corridors and streets. Jackson and Mia led the charge, every step a gamble, every second a battle for survival. In the heart of the compound, they found the control room, the core of the Revenant's operations. Machines hummed ominously, powering devices that threatened humanity's last hope. Jackson planted explosives with shaking hands. "Get ready to move," he ordered. Suddenly, Kate appeared, blocking their path, weapon drawn and eyes blazing with hatred. "This ends now," Jackson said, raising his rifle. Their final duel was brutal, a clash of strength, skill, and unyielding will. But Jackson's determination prevailed, and with a final shot, Cade fell. With the control room secured, Mia triggered the explosives. The compound shook violently as the charges detonated, sending shockwaves through the city. The survivors raced out just as the stronghold collapsed behind them, the nightmare technology reduced to rubble. Exhausted but victorious, they returned to Haven, greeted by cheers and tears of relief. The fight for dead America had reached its climax, and the survivors had won. Jackson looked out over the battered but unbroken community. "This is more than survival," he said quietly. "It's hope." The city was still scarred, and dangers remained, but for the first time in a long time, the future seemed possible. The survivors had faced the darkness and struck back. And now, they would rebuild, together. Ready for Part 10, the thrilling conclusion? Part 10, Dawn of a New Hope. The air in Haven was heavy with the scent of smoke and fresh earth, the aftermath of their final battle still settling over the broken city. The survivors gathered in the courtyard, eyes weary but filled with something that had been rare for a long time, hope. Jackson stood on the makeshift stage, his gaze sweeping over the faces of those who had endured so much and yet remained unbroken. "We fought through darkness and fear," he began, voice steady and full of quiet pride. "We faced enemies that threatened to erase everything we held dear. But we stood strong." Around him, murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Children clung to their parents, elders nodded with weary smiles, and the survivors who had once been strangers now stood united as a community. Sarah stepped forward, her calm presence a beacon amid the turmoil. "The war isn't over," she said gently. "The undead will always be a threat. But we have something stronger now, trust, unity, and a plan." Mia joined them, holding up a crude map of the city. "We've identified safe zones and resources. We'll rebuild, one street at a time, reclaiming our home from the shadows." Jackson's eyes lingered on the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to pierce the gray clouds. "This is our new beginning," he said. "Not just surviving, but living. Together." In the days that followed, Haven transformed. Makeshift farms sprung up in vacant lots, barricades were fortified with new purpose, and laughter, cautious but genuine, echoed through the streets. The survivors learned to share, to heal, and to hope. Yet, the memory of the Revenants and their controlled undead lingered like a shadow. Jackson knew vigilance was their greatest weapon. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Jackson stood watch with Mia and Eli. "We've won a battle," he said quietly, "but the war for this world will be ongoing." Mia nodded, her eyes reflecting the fading light. "We'll be ready." Eli smiled faintly. "Because we're not just survivors anymore. We're a family." And in that moment, amidst the ruins of dead America, a fragile but fierce promise was made, to protect, to rebuild, and to fight for a future worth living. The streets may have echoed with the sounds of war, but now they also whispered stories of courage, resilience, and the unbreakable spirit of humanity. As dawn broke fully over Haven, the survivors faced it not as victims, but as victors. A new chapter had begun. If you want, I can help you with a summary, photo prompts, or anything else for your project.